Uh, and once again, I hit the right button. I did not leave. So let's go to the next slide. We have a lot to cover today. I mean, as you know, if any of you have looked at the bylaws, they're quite extensive. And I want to try to touch on just about all situations that you're going to face. So we'll start off very briefly about parliamentary law, do an overview of what bylaws are, go through the basics of the bylaws, then go through the bylaws review process, and including the submission form for submitting your bylaws changes. We'll do a quick view of e-bylaws and how to get a status change, and then we'll close on the resources that are available to you. All right. Next slide. Bylaws. Oh, thank you. Parliamentarian law. These are the rules of the game. That's plain and simple. Any game you play has rules. You can't change the rules. We have to follow the rules. These are the basic principles of parliamentary law. Order, which is the consideration of one subject at a time. Only one piece of business can be discussed at a time. This keeps things moving smoothly and keeps things focused. Equal opportunity with partiality to none. Gives everyone a chance to participate. All members can propose motions, participate in debate, vote, and share in organizational activities. To vote, you must be a member for at least 30 days. The secretary at your meeting should have a list of the members with their join dates, so you will be able to control who is able to vote and make motions. Justice, fairness to all, ensuring that everyone understands the process, ensures that voting is to be fair and free for every member eligible to vote. All members have the right to ask questions and fully understand what effect their vote will have. Sometimes it gets confusing. Complex motions, you don't know, does a yes mean I agree? Does a yes mean I don't agree and it needs to go back? So complex motion should be explained by the chair. Everyone, all members can ask questions. The meetings should be conducted fairly and with respect. Procedural rules should be tools, not weapons. So don't look to get an gotcha moment when it comes to our meetings. Following procedures is everyone's best interest. Everyone is trying their best. The right of minority to be heard. All members have an equal voice. The right of the majority to decide. It's democratic rule. Partiality to none during a voice vote. In the event of a tie, the president may vote to break a tie and can also vote during a ballot vote. If there is no second to a motion, the motion dies for lack of a second, which would mean that no one else wishes to entertain this motion. Motions that come from a committee do not need a second and can be then brought forth and discussed. The current edition of Robert's Rules of Order is the 12th edition. That's where we get our basic parliamentary text that governs PTA, where the bylaws do not apply. However, and this is very important, our bylaws always take precedence over Robert's Rules. So our bylaws are the bottom line that we need to follow. Next slide, please. There, one more. Yeah. The bylaws are a roadmap. They are a legally binding document that helps you govern and show how the PTA should be run and function. It's basic roadmap for non-profit organizations and are the basic framework of a PTA. The bylaws, if used properly, can help build trusted relationships between your board and your association members. Since the bylaws are submitted to government agencies to obtain approval as a charitable trust organization, you need to properly follow the bylaws and review them and update them so they reflect how your PTA is working. You cannot change or suspend your bylaws. Bottom line, what they tell us. The membership tells us per capita dues and how much goes where. Boards and elections, what the required officers are, nominating committee requirements, term restrictions, and election dates. It tells you about your general board and association meetings and what the quorums are. The name and ID numbers of your unit. The policies and actions and procedures of the PTA. Who gets a copy? All members of the executive board. In addition, any member upon request may review a copy. You need to review them annually at least and update them at least every 5 years. And that is because the basic bylaws template changes from state. And what information gets changed in the bylaws, even if you haven't updated to a latest version, those still go into effect. For instance, when we were in lockdown for COVID, the state allowed us to have teleconferencing for our meetings. That wasn't allowed before. They changed the bylaws to include it, which meant that even if we didn't change our bylaws locally, we still could have the teleconferencing Zoom meetings. Standing rules. They direct the running of the organization. They are procedural, not parliamentary. Vice presidents, the officers, are listed in the standing rules. The association meeting dates are listed in the standing rules. And they provide committee information as well as the due process for committee chairs. The standing rules also list your standing committees. Those are your committees that run all year long. Standing rules may be revised by the bylaws committee and adopted by the executive board without revising the bylaws and a full bylaws review and approval process. However, a copy of the revised standing rules, including the completed standing rules signature page, must be forwarded to the council and district parliamentarians for their records. Okay, next slide. Getting into all the bylaws. These next two slides are just the list of what the sections are. The bylaws cover sheet is depicted right here. The upper left, number 1, is your national PTA identification number. The right side is your California state PTA identification number. It's usually a 4 or 5 digit number, and it's a great way to identify your units since some of our schools and units have the same name. Then comes number 3, the association name. This is the full name of your unit. Then comes the council PTA name. If you are in council, your council's full name will be listed here. If you are out of council, it will simply state out of council or be blank. The district name is always for us going to be 33rd District. Then comes the full school address. Then the grades that your school serves. Sometimes that never changes. Sometimes it does, especially at the elementary level. We used to just be kindergarten through 5th. Now we do TK through 5th. That is a change that would need to be made. And lastly, the organization date of the association. This is the date your unit was organized at the organization meeting. Some of them are predate all of us, and others are fairly recent. But it's always a good thing to have to know where to look to find that date. None of the information on this page can be changed by the unit, the council, or the district. California State PTA must make these changes. Please contact the district parliamentarian if you need to revise this information. I will explain later how to go about revising this. These are the next two slides are the articles of the PTA bylaws. You can just quickly go through them because we're going to go through them one by one. Next slide. There we go. Article 1, the name. This is the second place in your bylaws that has the full and complete name. If your PTA is the Phoebe Apperson Hurst Elementary School PTA, that would be written there. Locally, you can always refer to it as Hurst PTA or whatever your school likes to be considered. The places that you use this complete name include the bank, reflections entries, government forms and filings, any correspondence with state, including grants, scholarships, membership incentives, bylaws submission, anything that is to another entity, whether it be up the chain or just even as far as council, use the full name. If your association is out of council, the information is blank and lined out for council. All future references to council will be lined out throughout the bylaws if you are out of council. Next slide, please. You'll notice that these two articles, Articles 2 and 3, are starred. This means that the articles and sections cannot be lined out. The only action permitted is completing a blank line. Make sure that your association is following Section 3. It is something that everyone agreed to when they agreed to the IRS code. So it's just a formality, but it needs to be adhered to. Article 3 outlines the basic policies. All PTAs are non-commercial. You cannot tell people to shop somewhere. For instance, you can acknowledge the support of a vendor, like thank you to ABC Store for supporting our event. But you cannot say shop at ABC Store. There's a fine line there. You can thank them for supporting, which gets their name out there, but we cannot tell people where to shop, where to support a business. Non-sectarian means PTAs welcome into membership all people representing diverse cultures, ethnic backgrounds, political and religious beliefs. PTA should be hospitable to all. Nonpartisan means that the PTA must never support or oppose political parties or candidates, including those running for school boards on nonpartisan slates, even if they are members of your board. You cannot publicly support them as a PTA. Membership and dues. This section will describe the amount of the annual dues collected for your school. And it will describe the amount of money that's being dispersed to national PTA, state PTA, 33rd District PTA, your council, and how much money will be kept by your unit. It also includes membership due dates set by council and district. In some PTAs and PTSAs, there are due structures for staff and students at a reduced rate. However, sections 1B, 2, 3, and 4 must be remitted for every member, and that's the national, state, 33rd District, and council portion of the dues must be included even for the reduced rate. A bylaws review and revision is required if an association wants to collect a higher or a lower amount of dues. If you are using a paper fillable template, please check your math. How much money, because you do need to manually add up the national, state, 33rd District, and council portions. Next slide, please. Article 5, the officers and their elections. Nominating committee elections are a very important event, and it's outlined in this article. Only the officers listed in this section can be considered by the nominating committee. PTA term limits are also noted in this article, as are filling vacancies, which are a duty of the executive board or the executive board elect. As you can see, there are 3 positions that I have highlighted red on your slide: president, secretary, and treasurer. Those positions are required for all PTAs. Those that are in italics can be crossed out if you don't have that position at your PTA. Next slide, please. Duties of the officers and chairpersons, Article 6. The first bullet is a reference to the California State PTA toolkit. The toolkit is where the job descriptions can now be found. They used to be in the bylaws, but now they're in the toolkit. This has reduced the number of pages in the bylaws tremendously. So thank you to whoever did that. In recent versions of the bylaws, the check signers information has been moved from the standing rules to the bylaws directly. So you can see that it's now section 4 of Article 6, who the authorized check signers are: the president, the treasurer, and 1 or 2 elected officers other than the secretary or auditor or financial reviewer. The authorized signers cannot reside in the same household or be related by marriage. Section 6 also gives details of the officers' chair positions and their duties as stated in the bylaws. Also here, you would refer to how to call a special meeting and how to legally remove a non-attending officer or chairperson or someone whose conduct is injurious to the organization. And the due process is fully outlined and must be followed. It must be worked in conjunction with your council and 33rd District. Next slide, please. Article 7, association meetings. This article could be retitled, Everything You Always Wanted to Know About an Association Meeting but Didn't Know Where to Look. It's all here. Everything you need to know about the association or general meeting is contained in this section. The annual election meeting month, the requirements for calling a special association meeting, the budgets, programs, and expenditures which must be approved by the membership. The quorum is noted there. To ensure general participation in association meeting, the minimum quorum is the number of elected and appointed officers plus 4 or 11, whichever is greater. That is your association meeting quorum in order to conduct business. When there are 10 or more standing committee chairs, appointed or voting directors or specialists, that number is divided by 2 and then added to the association quorum. So if you have a lot of standing committee chairs, voting directors, and specialists, that affects your quorum. So keep that in mind when you're revising your bylaws. Section 6 says that you must be a member for at least 30 days to make motions, debate, or vote. So it's in the bylaws in this section. Voting by proxy, Section 7, is prohibited. Proxy voting includes phone votes, ballots being sent out to the school or membership and returned to the office, internet voting, sending your neighbor or non-member or spouse or child to vote for you. None of these are allowed. And any action taken in violation of the bylaws are null and void. So if this happens, whatever was discussed is null and void. Section 8 is the authorization for association teleconference meetings. Note in that section, it says may, not shall. So it gives permission to have teleconferencing, but it is not required. A shall would be required. Next slide, please. Section 8, the executive board. Section 1 lists who are the members of the executive board. Their duties are outlined, such as transacting business of the association, reporting, ratifying actions that were not pre-approved, approval of all financial records and tax information reports. The meeting notice of 14 days prior for an association meeting and a special meeting of 7 days. Now the quorum for the executive board is different. This is in section 6B. The minimum quorum for an executive board meeting is based on the number of executive board members, including the principal and the teacher representative, and any chairs that are listed in your description of your executive board. So you have to take that number of people, divide it by half, and add 1. If it is less than 5, 5 is the minimum that you can have as a quorum for an executive board. So even if you've got only the 3 positions, the president, the secretary, and the treasurer, the principal, and the teacher rep, you have to have 5 present to have a quorum. And once again, voting by proxy, all the ways that were described earlier, are not allowed whatsoever for the executive board. Okay, next slide. Article 9, council membership. Basically, this lists the name of your council, if you have one. It states the association members who attend the council meetings and how the delegates are selected. And usually the term of service for the delegates, which is 1 year. If you are out of council, you can feel free to line all this out and renumber below the council association. Next slide, please. Article 10, the charter procedures. All PTAs are chartered and organized under the authority of the California State PTA. The requirements for all these organizations need to be in the units in good standing, and all the information for state PTA requirements are found here. You adhere to the purposes and principles of PTA, nothing more, nothing less. You remit dues and insurance premiums timely. If you get dues submitted to you, you need to turn them into council, and council needs to turn them into 33rd District in a timely manner, which usually is monthly. The minimum members required, including officers, every officer needs to be a member. The minimum number of members is usually 15. You need to be up to date with your government filings. That includes your tax returns. And your bylaws need to be current within the last 5 years. Okay, next slide. Article 11. This explains the relationship with national and state PTA. It's more starred sections, so no changes or strike-throughs, and another reference to the toolkit. We are obligated to follow any changes that state or national makes in their bylaws, even if we haven't updated our bylaws yet. Next slide, please. We're coming down the home stretch. Article 12, Articles of Organization. The Articles of Organization paragraphs are listed in this section. One is for unincorporated units and the other is for incorporated units. Please cross out the one that doesn't apply to you. If your PTA is incorporated, please use the italicized paragraph. The Articles of Organization are also considered the Articles of Incorporation. Sometimes banks are confused and ask you for something different. According to state PTA, it's the same thing. Next slide, please. Article 13 lists all your identification numbers and your fiscal year. It states the start and end of your fiscal year and most, if not all, of your identification numbers. This is a good place to keep tabbed on your bylaws. A lot of times you'll be asked for your national PTA number or your state PTA number. And this is the place where you'd find it, if not on the cover for those two numbers. The other numbers, franchise tax board, EIN numbers are all listed here. The parliamentary authority, Robert's Rules of Order, 12th edition, or the quick guide is what you would need to refer to. It provides the authority for those items not covered in the bylaws or standing rules. However, as I said before, the bylaws always take precedent over Robert's Rules of Order. Next slide, please. Article 15, amendments. This section explains the amendment process. Section 4 explains that a triple star indicate a California state PTA requirement. And section 5 explains that 2 stars indicate a California corporate code requirement. These are things we cannot change. Next slide, please. The signature page. Some of the information is starred and cannot be lined out, even if not in use. The state parliamentarian will sign the signature page first. Then after the state parliamentarian approves the bylaws, it's sent back through channels, and then the unit president and secretary sign and date it, following the association adopting the new bylaws. Until that happens, the new bylaws and any information in it are not in effect. The signed portion of the bylaws need to be a copy of them sent to your council and 33rd District parliamentarians for their records. Okay, next slides. These 2 slides list the different sections of the standing rules, including the association meeting dates and meeting agenda, what can be included as areas that you cannot change. Next slide, please. The committees, how committees are formed are a California state PTA requirement and cannot be changed. Number 15 is the ability to have the virtual meetings. Once again, it's a may, not a shall. So you can have virtual meetings, but they're not required. Note that your standing rules may be adopted by a majority vote of the members present at any association meeting. The amendments to standing rules require a 2/3 vote of the members present without prior written notice, or a majority vote when there is notice provided. The standing rules should be procedural rather than parliamentary and may not conflict or supersede anything in the bylaws. Next slide. And now you've survived the first part of our presentation. And you get to talk and ask the questions.
We already have questions.
All right.
Okay, so I'm going to go through these in order. You guys online now, feel free to add your questions to the Q&A or to the little chat section. First question was, how do restaurant night fundraisers work here? So I think I have an idea, but Cindy, you want to maybe explain how the non-commercial policy would or wouldn't apply to like restaurant fundraiser night.
It's specific to the fundraiser. You're not telling people to go to CPK in general. You're saying come on this night between these times because they are sponsoring an event that will benefit our school.
Yeah, and also the California State PTA Toolkit does have a really good section. If you typed in non-commercial, they lay out the policy in pretty, I think, easy to understand terms. They don't want you to make a qualitative judgment of the sponsor's products or services. So Joe's widgets are the best. Don't do that. Do not include comparative language or language that implies good quality in the acknowledgement. Joe's widgets are so much better than Bob's widgets. We don't really know that, so don't say that. Maybe they are, maybe they're not.
Even if we believe that, we cannot.
Yeah. Do not permit the sponsor to write acknowledgement of things, like thank you, ABC PTA, for endorsing our product. Again, endorsements, that's what you're basically trying to hold off on. You know, and to Cindy's point, like your association would have approved this as a fundraiser whose proceeds go back to funding your programs. It's different than you guys choosing to make a nearby local cafe, the PTA cafe, you know, of choice. I hope that answers. If that doesn't, please pop it back in the chat or maybe clarify. Amanda asked, are children who have paid membership allowed to vote?
This is one of those dicey questions. Technically, yes, they can vote, but the guidelines are that they have to be able to understand the vote and vote independently without assistance from the parent or guardian or another student.
That's a good question. I've gotten that, and I've also gotten, can dogs be voting members? The answer for that is an unequivocal no. But that's a good one. What does a unit, Teresa asked, what does a unit do if they don't have 5 to make a quorum? They're a tiny little board. They've got a dedicated 4. They got to keep this business moving forward. What do you suggest? I know that there are lots of units that unfortunately find themselves in that space.
Unfortunately, you need to find somebody that's willing to participate. This goes to show that if you don't have enough people willing to be on the board, you're not representing your school properly. And that's where the election of the officers comes in, to have the people be voting for someone with a voice to represent them. So if it's too small, then maybe you need to reach out, talk to the principal, perhaps, of a parent, knowing a parent that maybe hasn't come to a PTA meeting or expressed their interest to PTA, but is active at the school, and the principal might feel that there would be a good addition.
Yeah, that's a great one. That happens a lot. I agree with everything Cindy said. I would also say, don't forget that you have the benefit of using virtual meetings. You could host yours via Google Meet. If you have a Gmail account, if you don't have a Zoom account, and Zoom accounts aren't a ton of money either. You could choose as a PTA to go that route and spend the money, or any other software.
Even the free Zoom, and keep your meetings short.
Yeah, so you definitely can. I think sometimes it may be timing, location, and people's availability. And also, I can't stress enough, it is so important to have one-on-one conversations, one-on-one emails, one-on-one phone calls. Those things move the needle. I'm a serial volunteer. Someone should cut my hands off. So I just don't volunteer for things anymore. I'm not sure that would work. But the main point being that people do like to volunteer and do stuff. They sometimes just need to be individually asked. I almost never say or sign off on any form myself, and that's what I love volunteering. But there are very few things I reply to in mass, and so you may find that there are some hidden gems of adults in your guys' school community, and if you would only but ask, not you necessarily as a parliamentarian, but it really is important to recruit. Another question from Teresa. She says, is it only the executive board who gets a copy of the unit bylaws, or can PTA member request a copy too? I know you touched on this, but maybe it's just a bit of a clarification.
They do not get a copy. They can review a copy, which means you can have a copy and meet them in the office and they can take their time going through it. But there is a lot of proprietary confidential numbers, the EIN number, that they don't want general members to have. So that's the reason we don't put them on our website.
Yeah.
But they're not secret. So a member can take their time and review it, or review it multiple times.
But board members, I'm sorry, but board members can get a copy, correct? Executive board.
Yeah,
Yes.
they should be provided one at the beginning. You really want the entire board to be well trained and well versed, at least, and especially with the things that you know, to Cindy's point, you can't really change. I mean, it's important that they know how many, think of everybody as potential future PTA presidents or leaders or parliamentarians. You want everybody to have a good, solid, firm awareness. They don't necessarily have to know all of the parliamentary rules, but you want them to be able to help you out and know what quorum is, or know that you guys have membership dues that are set at something and you can't just change them willy-nilly. I have one more question. I think several actually. Ooh, hot stuff.
Oh, good.
What is the purpose of a council assessment fee, number 17 in the standing rules? That I can't speak to because I don't.
I can't speak to it either because my council didn't have one. So it's basically a fee that is assessed to all units in the council that goes to fund council related events.
Oh. I see what you mean. So in Torrance Council, we do have something. I don't think we call it an assessment fee, and I don't know if that's exactly what this is, but I do know that we have like a suggested donation amount that funds like the school-wide district council initiative. Like we have everyone throw a little bit of money into our health line item, and with that we do something school district wide. Is that similar, or is that
it's separate? That's okay. Funding just it's directed funding for an event.
But not everybody is. But
not everybody has that.
Okay, that's helpful to know. So if it doesn't sound familiar to you guys and it's not in your standing rules, that's probably why.
Linda has raised. Maybe she wants to.
Oh yeah.
I just wanted to jump in just because our council does charge one. Some councils charge an assessment, but not all. Some councils charge part of the membership dues, just like 33rd and state and national do. So there are different ways that councils collect money. And it's, for our trainings that we put on for our events, because I don't know about other councils, but we don't really fundraise because that would take away from all the fundraisers that our units do. So this is really the only thing that we get, and it is in the bylaws. It is approved every year, annually. We haven't changed it in a long time, and the amount for each council is different. But yeah, that's just a little recap, and I only know because we do.
No, that's super helpful. I've never seen that model, but I've only ever been a part of one council, so I know that there's a whole bunch of variety. That's helpful.
Very.
We have another hand raised, Anita, and I apologize if I pronounced it wrong. You want to go ahead and unmute? If you still have a question, feel free to unmute, or if you want to type it in chat, you can do that too. I don't want anyone to feel like they're under the gun. We did get a question, but I think we're going to answer this later. It says our e-bylaws don't match up to our current paper bylaws. How do I fix that? We'll touch on that right in the next section.
Yes.
Another question: what is a great way to explain to our association what a council assessment fee is and what they do? Hopefully, Veronica, the explanation that you just heard is helpful. But let me know if that wasn't addressed, or you feel like maybe you still need some clarity. Happy to answer that in chat. Another question, I believe the dues collected by council should cover their own expenses. It's not a responsibility of the units to cover council expenses. So I want to clarify here, and I guess I know we have council leadership who is also here. Council isn't trying to, I think about it like this. So as the individual units in your school district, right? You guys are hyper-focused maybe on that school community locally. Your council is really the thread that runs through it all, sort of the layer cake above you guys. They support you as well as work closely with the school district. And so any programs that a council would fund would be to benefit the students in that school district as a whole. Similarly, when you hand over your member dues, your money doesn't stay just locally at your school. A portion of it goes to council and district and state and national for that exact reason. It's sort of like we are all in this together. So it's not about being only hyper-focused at the school. It's sort of a community, because our mission is all families and children. It's not just all families and all children that go to ABC school. So I could see where maybe people would be like, hey, I don't think our unit should give you the $30 or whatever it is. It's usually pretty nominal. That goes to benefit kind of district or council-wide stuff that benefits all students and families equally, let's say. And then Veronica said, since it's not in our bylaws that we say a unit must pay for council, and the bylaws are the bylaws. So yep. There you go. What happens if a member was given a copy of bylaws?
You should ask for it back. You can't force them to give it back to you, but you should ask them for it back, because it is proprietary information in there, as well as it would set a bad precedence. Why did Mary get a copy and you're saying I can't get a copy? So if it's all possible, I mean, hopefully the person is understanding the reasoning why, and we'll give the hard copy back.
Definitely. I see Anisa's hand is, or
yeah.
Hi.
Hi. Okay. This is regarding the assessment fee, because I believe, like, when the council and the state, they are collecting the dues from the membership, that you're supposed to cover their operational expenses, no?
Not always. Sometimes there are councils that only take an assessment and do not take any of the dues and keep it at council. Sometimes they take a very small amount, like 25 cents per member, and it's a very large council. And so even 25 cents would not cover the operating expenses or the district-wide, the council-wide events that would benefit all students, whether it be a speaker or some sort of event.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
If you have further questions, don't hesitate to contact me directly.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yes, because I might just hypothetical questions. Before my council charge this assessment fee, and then they explain this assessment fee are for the certain expenses, like in-person meeting to cover certain events, just like what we agree. Okay, that's why I have no problem. But, and also that fee for like a contribution to this something very specific. And then because of the COVID, there's no assessment fee being imposed because we don't have in-person, you know. And this year, okay, they charge again, or last year, basically they started to charge back the assessment fee. And then we ask, what is this for? And when they give us a breakdown, they show us, okay, this is to cover like almost all their expenses. So which is, I don't agree, you know. So I just wonder, what are the expenses authorized as an annual assessment fee?
This should be available in your council budget. You can request to look at the council budget and have it explain where the income is coming from and how it is being spent. And if you're a district, a unit president, you are represented on the council and can voice your concerns. Or if you're not, you can have your president voice your concerns.
Okay, yes. Thank you. Yeah, I just want a clarification because this is something that okay, it's fine to pay, but there is certain expenses that I think why the unit's supposed to pay for your own operational expenses, which is like, it doesn't make sense.
Well,
Okay, that's fine. Thank you so
yeah.
much for
hopefully the
explanation.
variety of
Yeah.
of sharing their different things. Hopefully that's helpful. Again, every council does do it a little differently, and at the end of the day, these it sounds like they're legitimate expenses. Everyone's volunteers up to this point and beyond, so no one's lining their pockets on the backs of our units. But pretty well taken. The only other question I have is for Article 12. Articles of organization, how do we know if we're unincorporated or incorporated?
Look at the front page of your bylaws. If you're incorporated, it'll say your name, comma, INC.
I like that. That was the easiest answer so far. You let me know if you're ready to move on, Cindy.
Go ahead. If we have no more questions at this point, we'll take questions again at the end if we have time.
Yes, thank you guys so much for the lively conversations and the good questions. There's a lot of learning to be had, that's for sure.
Okay, the bylaws review process. The purpose of a bylaws committee is to ensure that there is consensus on what changes or amendments or additions will help the organization and the members better advocate for our children and their families and to carry out the mission of PTA. That's the bottom line of what the bylaws will guide us in. And the committee will make sure it's not just one or two people, the president and the parliamentarian, saying, we should change these things. Having a committee gives a lot of different viewpoints and voices. The bylaws should be reviewed annually and revised at least every 5 years. There are specific steps and procedures that need to be followed when submitting updated bylaws for approval. The president will appoint a bylaws committee of 3 to 5 members, key is members, chaired by the parliamentarian. It does not have to be a member of the board. It helps if the majority are familiar with the bylaws to begin with and have had experience, but it is not a requirement. The committee will then review the bylaws to see if any changes are necessary, and they will complete a set of the most current bylaws using e-bylaws, which is the easiest way to do it because it calculates any of the quorums for you, as well as it's mostly fill in the blank. And then the parliamentarian will fill out the bylaws submission form for the unit and council bylaws. If I forgot to say it before, the parliamentarian chairs the bylaws committee and is one of the members. The committee will prepare and present to the executive board the recommendations or the fact that no changes need to be made and you're just updating to a new template. The executive board then will vote on the bylaws, and the outcome should be recorded, must be recorded in the minutes. At that point, once they are approved by the executive board, the parliamentarian completes the bylaws submittal form listing all amendments that were approved and emails it along with the bylaws to the council parliamentarian. At this point, no signatures are required. The council parliamentarian will review for errors and completeness. Make sure all the changes are listed. And once that happens, the council information will be filled out on the bylaws submission form and emailed to the district parliamentarian with the copy of the bylaws. So the submission form and the bylaws goes up each level. The district parliamentarian will review for errors and completeness and then add their information to the bylaws submission form. This is a state bylaws submission form. It's a fillable PDF. So it makes it easy. You don't have to print it out, handwrite it, and scan it in and email it. It's a fillable PDF. Once it's submitted to the California State PTA parliamentarian, they need to review and approve it. Sometimes they have questions and reject it until the questions are resolved. Other times, if it's straightforward, they just approve it. And when they approve it, next slide, please. They approve it and sign it as the state parliamentarian, and they return it back through channels to the district parliamentarian, who sends it then back to the council parliamentarian, who then sends it back to the unit for association approval and unit signatures. An association meeting is scheduled to adopt the amendments to the bylaws. Members of the association must be notified in advance, at least 30 days of this meeting, and get a list of the proposed amendments with this notice. 2/3 vote of the association is required to adopt the amendments. The results of the vote must also be recorded in the meeting minutes. The unit parliamentarian then sends a copy of the signature page that was signed by the president and the secretary up through channels to the council and district parliamentarians for their records. So they have a complete signed set at both the council and district levels. This is the first page of the bylaws submission form. All the blank areas are fillable. Any of the information should be on your existing bylaws or in your existing bylaws, like your EIN number. It's in your bylaws. Then you'll fill out what the changes to the bylaws and standing rules are. Is it no change? We just want to update the template. We're changing just our standing rules. We're changing standing rules and bylaws. We're just changing our bylaws. That information needs to be put in this section 2. You would be skipping over section 3 or this box here and move on to the second page. Oops. Here is where you'll give a complete list of any amendments from the old version of your bylaws to the new version of your bylaws. If there are no changes, you can just say no changes and not fill out anything. At that point, the unit officer will fill out number 4 on the left side, straight down, all their information, and send both the submission form and the bylaws to the council parliamentarian. If there isn't a council parliamentarian, it's the responsibility of the council president to review the bylaws. That's incentive for your councils to get a parliamentarian. It definitely helps alleviate some of the workload. for the president. On the right side is where the council parliamentarian or officer who's reviewing it and attesting that the changes are correct, they put their information there. Next slide, please. Now comes the fun part, electronic bylaws. This slide shows how to access e-bylaws from the California State PTA website. This is directly, you can go to California State PTA, capta.org website and go to PTA leaders. As you can see, it'll bring down a drop box, go to run your PTA, and you can click on bylaws and standing rules. All that information is available on the website. Next slide, please. This is the page that it would take you to for bylaws. You can get your user and password for changing your bylaws if you don't already have one. It usually takes about 3 to 5 days. You fill in a form after clicking on request username and passwords, fill out the form, select user type. If you are not the parliamentarian, just select unit officer assisting parliamentarian, even if you don't have one. That's perfectly reasonable. You select your district number, in this case 33rd, and your council. You type in your school name, full name, your city, the state PTA ID number that is found in your bylaws. You enter a username that you want to use. It should also be in all lowercase. Make sure you write it down along with the password so you don't forget. They don't keep records of this information. Click next and done to submit the request. And as I said, it will take up to 3 to 5 days, sometimes quicker. If you want to go directly to this e-bylaws page, the direct link is listed at the bottom. capta.org/PTA-leaders/services/e-bylaws. That'll get you directly to this page. Okay, next page, please. This is additional information that's available on our website for e-bylaws. You can get bylaws review procedures both in English and in Spanish, instructions for completing the bylaws in English and in Spanish. However, the bylaws worksheet is only in English because the e-bylaws are only in English at this time and only available for units. Next slide, please. When you start updating your e-bylaws, you would get to this page that has your unit information. It'll list your unit name, which is circled here, all your numbers. If any of this information is incorrect, you cannot change it on this page or from e-bylaws. You cannot change it. As I was saying, this is the information that's on the front page of your bylaws, as well as your listing of all your important ID numbers. State PTA needs to update this information. So if there are errors or something has changed, like grades 9 through 12 in this example suddenly become 10th through 12th for your school, This information needs to be submitted up to your district parliamentarian, and a change of status form needs to be filed on your behalf for anything that needs to be changed on this page, including address, if the zip code is wrong, anything that's wrong on this page, notify the parliamentarian at the district level to fill out a change of status form on your behalf. And you can't, until that happens, you cannot go forward and print out a working, usable copy to submit. You can go forward and look at all the things that you want to change and come up with a draft PDF version. But it's best to wait until this information is correct. Then you can go sequentially and do it all at once. This way you won't forget anything. Next slide, please. Oops, there we go. This is the electronic bylaws area to fill out for the officers in their elections. You fill out whether you have an executive vice president, yes or no, the number of vice presidents you have, whether you have a corresponding secretary, a financial secretary, an auditor, how many members are on your nominating committee, how many alternates, when your officers assume their duties, and who gives notice if there is a vacancy by the president, whether it be executive vice president or first vice president. That should match whether you have an executive vice president or not. Next slide, please. This is the form for filling out the association meetings, when the meetings are held, not the dates, but what day of the week, what day of the month, what months are the association meetings. It's a full list of all association meetings. Note that your election meeting, your last meeting, in this case, is your election meeting. You could have an association meeting every month. And so therefore your and star would be May or June. But you have to make sure that even if it's April for your last meeting, you have to put April for your election meeting if that's when your election meeting is. It may look like it's redundant, but it needs to be separately called out. And of course, how many members will take to call a special meetings and how many members in quorum. Next, please. If there is an error, it will catch it. For instance, meetings here are held on the first Tuesday. It's e-bylaws program is catching it and saying the executive board meeting must meet at least 14 days prior to the association meeting. So one of the two meetings needs to change. In addition, this is where your quorum will be double checked. It will call out an error if it is wrong. Next slide, please. You can always increase a quorum, but you can never decrease from the minimum. The typical reasons for changing a status would be the grade changes for your school, like TK to 5th. It used to be kindergarten through 5th. Your fiscal year changed. Your name of your school or your school's address has changed. Those are the status changes that cannot be made by the unit or council or district. This information needs to go to the district parliamentarian. Next slide, please. I would then fill out this change of status form on your behalf. I then would have to sign it and then send it through channels up to the district parliamentarian. Any of this information needs to be changed by state PTA, and every change needs to be listed. You can list more than one change. You could have a change of name and change of grade level on the same form. Next slide, please. After the district parliamentarian notifies the unit parliamentarian that the state has made the changes, they will be made available in bylaws. You can go to the e-bylaws and start, and you'll have should have the correct information. So then at that point would be the time to go put all the changes that your committee agreed on into e-bylaws. Then the unit parliamentarian will follow the procedures via channels for updating the bylaws, as we explained before. Next slide. And you have survived the introduction more than you've ever wanted to know about bylaws.
That's good.
Yep.
I felt like I learned a lot, Cindy.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Well, that's easier. I think what I don't know. It's a lot more than what I do know generally.
There is nobody really that sits there and reads the bylaws cover to cover and memorizes them so that they're an expert. So don't worry if you're constantly referring to bylaws. I am constantly looking up, whether it be state bylaws, our bylaws at 33rd, a council's bylaws, or even a unit's bylaws to find out what is required, because everyone's bylaws are specific to their association.
Oh yeah. I'm gonna read out a couple questions and then
Sure.
we can go to the crowd if you want. So on the topic of approving material for association meetings, any non-PTA material to be distributed at an association meeting must be approved by the executive board prior to the meeting. That's what they're speaking to. Does this include speakers that the principal wants to have there?
Yes, because if it's a PTA meeting or a PTA event, the information provided cannot go against PTA guidelines. For instance, if it's
Well, we're getting into election season. I mean, think about it that way.
you may want to put out
Yeah.
their flyers
You
and
have
say
a senator,
everyone's flyers.
member, come to your PTA, or just make their. I think you want to know what's going to be put out. Basically, you want to be able to say unequivocally that this is fine. So you don't want to be having everybody, it's a free for all and everyone's leaving their flyers and business cards. I think. Somebody else asked if we need to update the bylaws to add more roles. Who can be authorized check signers on the bank account? What is a typical role on the executive board who can be added, or who can be added as one? So anything about adding new roles or positions or adding check signers or how that works?
Not the secretary and not the financial reviewer. Usually it's the other or a couple of other VPs that are available. It's usually officers, not treasurer, not the financial officers, other than the treasurer, who's automatically. You don't want to have the entire financial team being the signers on the checking account for checks and balances purposes.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And not by blood or marriage either. We know that you can't reside in the same household, so there's some rules about that too.
Yes.
So hopefully that's enough for you guys to get going. Also, your council parliamentarian should be a great resource. If you reach out to them, they can help be a part of that process, or at least make sure that you as you're getting ready for the next step, that you guys are on, on the right track. Another question, point of clarification, just to clarify, organizations can't just pop in and give a speech at your association meeting or whatnot. It must be cleared by the executive board prior to the association meeting. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Um,
And the information must adhere to PTA guidelines.
yep. And then
It can't
Deborah,
be partisan, it can't be commercial.
yeah, for all the same reasons. And it's your meeting. So, I mean, I feel like if your principal wants you to have a guest or would like to invite someone, it should be at your team's discretion or your president's discretion, not, you know, and I think a lot of times those back to school nights, you kind of border on a school event, and our meeting maybe precedes everything. So it's good to find out like when they'll be, you know, these guests will come on. If they're guests of the school speaking after your PTA meeting concludes, not an issue. But if the expectation is that you're going to add them to your agenda, make sure you guys feel good about that. Another question, other than the ability to meet virtually due to the pandemic, what are some other examples or reasons that bylaws may need to be changed or updated at the unit or council level? I'm not fully sure I understand what that one is. I know that you can still hold a virtual meeting and hybrid meetings regardless, like that provision is there now.
Right. But it may not be if you have bylaws that are 4 years old. It would be in your current bylaws. The amount of dues, for instance, last year, National PTA tried to increase the dues that we send to National PTA. It got defeated, but if it passed, and they now required that for every member we send up $4, that would go into effect whether you change your bylaws or not.
So when they make their update, when they're hopefully at their, you know, whenever they make their update, that would be reflected. They would come back in the new template or whatever, right? That would now be included.
Yes.
Okay.
In addition, updating just to update to a new template is important to make sure your bylaws are current in the last 5 years. Even if you don't want to change anything, it's always best to have a current bylaws in the last 5 years.
I like that's good advice. One other question is, how often do they need to fill out bylaws? I think they mean probably how often should they review, and maybe how often should they resubmit. I know you answered this, but
right, you should review them at least once a year. You have to review and approve your standing rules every year. But you should review them because something may change. You may no longer need if you're only doing virtual meetings, you may not need a VP of hospitality. That's something that happened at 33rd. So we changed our bylaws for that. It all depends what will change. If you're feeling that you have association meetings every month and in December nobody shows up because it's the holidays time, maybe you want to update your bylaws to not have a meeting in December. Things like that are things to look out for. In the handouts, there are suggestions of ideas that you can look for when reviewing your bylaws.
Do we want to go live? Maybe Jennifer, would you want to unmute? I see you've been patiently waiting with your virtual hand, and then we can go back to chat.
Thank you so much. Thank you, ladies. Yes, my name is Jennifer, and I have a question for you regarding the update of bylaws. So we have reviewed and we've sent out our bylaws. And one of the big changes that we made was our standing chairs and our elected positions. So from what I have read, the quorum for the executive board does not include the standing chairs. And the video from last year's district training also said that so did that change from last year to this year now?
In your particular case, it's in your bylaws.
Right. So
it says that the executive board is making up of the standing chairs. This is a specific question.
Yes, yes,
Feel
yes.
free to contact me.
Can I contact you directly? Because I know it was said to go to
Absolutely.
my council parliamentarian, but
Mhm.
can I go directly to you?
First go to your council parliamentarian who will probably give you the same answer. And if they don't or are unable to, feel free to
Right.
contact me.
Right,
But
because I
you
think
need to check with your council parliamentarian.
okay, thank you.
I'll also put in chat in just a moment on the leaders website. I think, is this called standing rule 17 or something? They
Yeah,
have like guidance on it. There's like a little notation that kind of explains the quorum, the standing committees versus regular committees. I know
right.
it's yeah, not altogether intuitive. I will admit. Let's see, other questions. Oh, how are bylaws supposed to be passed on from one unit parliamentarian or board member to the next? She says, I just had a faded PDF. Should I start the e-bylaws process? I think it's a two-part question.
Sure.
What's a good practice for passing those along? And then I guess how does the e-bylaw process work with that?
If you an outgoing parliamentarian has hard copies of the information and everything that you've submitted, then it's fine to pass along the hard copies. If it's all electronic, feel free to pass it along electronically. If you don't have access to the prior parliamentarian and are looking for the bylaws, check with your president of your unit. They should have access to it and should make sure that you as parliamentarian get a copy so you can distribute to your executive board.
Another question, what if a previous parliamentarian did the e-bylaws, but maybe you don't know the password? What would you recommend them doing? Should they start a new username?
Get a new account. Yes.
Cool. I like that. Another question is, we're currently reviewing our bylaws to submit, and we have a committee. As president, what's my role? Can I be at the meeting?
You as president can be at every committee meeting except the nominating committee. So all your committees should be letting you know when they meet, what their agenda is, and you would make the decision whether you want to attend or not. And that goes for all committees, including the bylaws committee. You don't count towards the 3 to 5.
Yeah. Well, and I also say as a unit president, or a president period, I think it's always a good practice to have a side discussion with the key, like whoever's going to be leading or chairing. Like this might be a good opportunity for you and the parliamentarian to sit down and make sure like you guys both feel comfortable with the process. So when you get your committee together, you can seamlessly roll it out, exactly what materials, exactly what the process will look like, including your timeline. So I think that's an opportunity for you to kind of lead from the front with the person who is kind of charged with being like the main person. I love that stuff. Anything you can do to help empower your leaders to be even more amazing and impactful.
And communication is key. So any reason for communicating is a good thing.
Oh yeah. In between meetings, wholeheartedly agree. Last question was, how do you know the deadline for your annual review? I don't remember if that's in the bylaws or not. Probably,
I don't think
right?
it's in the bylaws. I think your financial team will get that information.
Yeah. Okay, because that's up to me. I'm like, oh my gosh, maybe I don't know my bylaws. Don't worry, we'll edit that part out. Any other questions from anybody else, or anything that maybe we missed in the questions? Feel free to pop those in now. I'll look in the chat, but if you want, I can move on to the last bit.
Sure. It's just our resources.
Voila. Oh wait, I'm so sorry. My keyboard's been so sticky today. I don't know what's happening. My little mouse is misbehaving.
So your unit and council bylaws are most important to you. You can go to the 33rd District website. Our information will be there for our trainings. You can go to our YouTube channel for previous trainings, other training workshops. You can go to state PTA website, including the toolkit. Those sites, how to get there directly for the toolkit and e-bylaws are listed here, as well as how to get to the state PTA website. In addition, California State PTA has a leaders website that you just apply for if you're a PTA leader, and you get access to a lot of trainings and explanations for various materials. And of course, we're part of National PTA. Their website has a lot of good information also. And just thank you all so much for attending and making sure that you are growing as a PTA leader and understanding bit by bit all the nuances of our bylaws. You're not expected to know the bylaws inside and out after this workshop. I certainly don't. So don't put pressure on yourself. The video will be available. You have your handouts. You can ask questions of your council, parliamentarian, or you can ask me.